Order! I call Secretary of State Gavin Williamson to make a statement.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement regarding restrictions that will be lifted for schools, early years, childcare, colleges and universities when we move to step 4, which is currently anticipated as the 19th of July. The Prime Minister announces that step 4 will be able to remove swathes of restrictions on daily life, and that after 16 months of sacrifice by those across society, we will return ever closer to normality. We have faced down together a historic public health emergency, and that we all owe a great debt of gratitude to pupils, parents and teachers who have given up so much as we have taken action to save lives. I do, however, want to highlight to everyone that step 4 does not mean the end of a pandemic, and some restrictions will be kept in place while we move towards more of a population being fully vaccinated. While the pandemic is not over, we are moving into a new phase of managing COVID from strict rules and towards ever more greater personal responsibility. When I came to this place last week, I again set out my priority to put the interests of children first. We know from our own experience and evidence that children are better off in classrooms with their friends and teachers. Millions of children and young people have been back in the classroom since March the 8th, learning with their friends and teachers. This is hugely valuable for their well-being as well as for their education. I also made clear that I do not think that it is acceptable that children should face greater restrictions over and above those of wider society, especially since they have given up so much to keep older generations safe during this pandemic. So, having balanced the risks, I'm pleased to tell members across the House that key restrictions on education and childcare will come to an end as we move to step 4. Though keeping children in consistent groups was essential to control the spread of the virus when our population was less vaccinated, we recognise that the system of bubbles and isolation is causing disruption to many children's education. That is why we'll be ending bubbles and transferring contact tracing to the NHS test and trace system for early years settings, schools and colleges. Where there are outbreaks, schools and colleges may be contacted by NHS test and trace, and they will also work with local health teams as they currently do now. We're also setting out new rules that mean that from the 16th of August, children will only need to isolate if they have tested positive for COVID-19. I'm also pleased to be able to say there will be no restrictions on in-person teaching and learning in universities unless students are advised to isolate or impacted by local outbreaks. From step 4, a more proportionate set of controls will apply in early years, schools, colleges and higher education institutions. These will maintain a baseline of protective measures in education settings while maximising attendance and minimising disruption to children and young people's education. In addition to ending bubbles, it will not be necessary to stagger start and finish times. Schools and colleges may, of course, continue with these measures until the end of the summer term, if they so wish. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, outlined earlier today that we can ease restrictions on the rules of self-isolation for close contacts of someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. In education settings, all other existing measures, including guidance on isolation of contacts, will stay in place until the end of this term, in line with isolation rules for the rest of the population as more adults are vaccinated. Settings will continue to have a role in working with health protection teams in the case of a local outbreak. Where necessary, some measures may need to be reintroduced. From August the 16th, those under the age of 18 years old will no longer be required to self-isolate if they are contacted by NHS Test and Trace as a close contact of a positive COVID-19 case. This will balance the need to keep children safe at the same time as allowing them to get the education that they deserve and need. Instead, children will be contacted by Test and Trace, informed they have been in close contact with a positive case, and advised to take a PCR test. 18-year-olds will be treated in the same way as children until 4 months after their 18th birthday to allow them to have the opportunity to get fully vaccinated. Having listened to teachers and balancing the risks to health and education, to maximise attendance and minimise disruption to children and young people's education, some protective measures, including enhanced hygiene and ventilation, will remain in place for the autumn term. From step 4, face coverings will no longer be advised for pupils, students, staff and visitors, either in classrooms or in communal areas, and social distancing will no longer be necessary. As I mentioned earlier, testing programmes remain important as we move cautiously out of restrictions. With this in mind, secondary schools and colleges will be asked to provide 2 on-site tests to their students at the start of term, with regular home testing continuing until the end of September, when this will be reviewed. It is vital that secondary school and college students continue to test for the last few weeks of this term and throughout September. Education settings were still operating over the summer will continue to test twice a week, with asymptomatic test kits still available to families over the summer break as well. I also want to encourage all teachers, educational staff and eligible students to get their vaccines. It is incredibly important for all staff to get the second dose of a vaccine as soon as they are eligible, so they secure the strongest possible protection against COVID-19. In line with wider changes to isolation from August the 16th, if in close contact with someone who has tested positive, fully vaccinated teachers will be able to remain in the classroom from the autumn term. My department has just set out more detail and published new guidance for arrangements in education settings from step 4, covering both a summer period and the following term when children will return to school. I want to take this opportunity to assure members that head teachers in their constituencies can contact the Department of Education if they have any questions about the new guidance that we have published. Madam Deputy Speaker, no government would want to restrict people's freedom in the way we have had to since the spread of COVID-19. We have prioritised education since the start of this pandemic. We made sure that schools and colleges were the last to close, but the first to open. We kept school and college places open to vulnerable children and those of key workers throughout the pandemic, and procured millions of laptops and tablets for children to learn at home. None of this could have been achieved without the incredible work of our inspirational teachers and wider educational staff. And I'd like to thank the parents and students who have shown patience and flexibility over the last 18 months. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that many colleagues will agree that today, as a nation, we prize the role of schools, colleges and universities more than ever before. With the ending of these restrictions, children and young people will be able to get back on with their education and lives while we continue to manage this pandemic. I commend the statement to the House.
Thank you. We now go to the Shadow Secretary of State, Kate Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for advance sight of it. I'd also like to echo his tribute to the education staff, pupils and parents who've done so much over the past 15 months to keep children and young people learning. Just over an hour ago, the Department for Education confirmed that last week 623,000 pupils were not in school because of coronavirus. And while 471,000 of those pupils were out of class because of a bubble collapsing, there were still over 150,000 who were not in the classroom with confirmed or suspected cases of coronavirus or because of potential contact with a case outside the classroom. It's not just bubbles that have driven pupils from the classroom, it's the Conservatives' negligence in letting the Delta variant take hold at the same time as they fail to support schools with the necessary precautions. I've always said that school is the best place for children for their learning, their well-being and their development, and that's why we must do everything we can to keep them there safely. Many parents will be relieved to hear that the chaotic bubbles policy is coming to an end, but the Secretary of State hasn't given us confidence that his alternative will keep more children in school without driving up infections. His department has piloted using testing instead of the bubble system, but he didn't mention this in his statement. Can he tell us the results of those pilots and using daily testing in some schools? Did it mean more hours in the classroom? Did it mean more cases? Did it mean an unmanageable workload for school leaders? Can he confirm how many schools pulled out of the pilots and if the reasons for schools' withdrawal is informing his department's planning for next year? He said bubbles will end when we reach stage 4, but that there won't be any on-site testing until September. So what support is he putting in place to keep pupils in the classroom for the remainder of this term? He said bubbles need to end in order to support summer schools. Can he confirm that they will have mitigations in place in addition to testing so that children can learn and not just isolate over the summer? And separate to summer schools, his department has promised a holiday activities and food programme. Can you tell me what measures will be in place to ensure this programme can run so that children don't miss out on the opportunities it offers? The Secretary of State spoke of a baseline of protective measures when schools return in September. Can he say more about what they are? He mentioned better ventilation. Will all schools receive support from his department to put this in place? And specifically on masks, can he explain to me why masks were required in schools in March and April, but aren't required now when case numbers are much higher? Will he publish the scientific evidence that I'm sure he's received to underpin his decision? And if he can't do that, will he reconsider it? We know that the vaccination programme delivered by the NHS remains our route out of the pandemic, but we still don't know if it will be available to children. When does he expect to receive this advice? And when will he make it public? If the JCVI do propose vaccinating older children, can he guarantee that the infrastructure will be in place to begin that process before the return to the classroom in September? And as we look ahead to the new academic year, can he guarantee that schools, staff and pupils will know his plans for assessments next year by the 1st of September at the latest? The Secretary of State mentioned on-site testing in colleges, but what other measures will be in place? Have they been supported, for example, to implement better ventilation? I'm sure students will welcome the return of in-person teaching and learning in higher education, but can the Secretary of State say what protective measures will be in place in these settings and what steps will be taken to support the return and safe learning of international students? Madam Deputy Speaker, I want nothing more than for children to be in class, learning and spending time with their friends and their teachers. And it's right for their learning that we move away from the chaotic bubbles system. But we can't simply wish away the real challenges of the pandemic. Today's statement offers no clarity on how the government will stop infections spiralling, the Conservatives' inadequate testing regime, lack of action on ventilation, and their recklessness at the border have put our children's education at risk. This must not continue.
Secretary of State.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady touched on a number of areas there. In terms of universities, we of course are always supporting universities in terms of international students, but also supporting them to get back to face-to-face teaching, welcoming youngsters back into the lecture theatre, which is, I know, something and part of the university experience that so many students have dearly, dearly missed. The Honourable Lady does seem to have missed probably actually the biggest point and the biggest thing that has actually changed over the past few months. And I do appreciate that the Honourable Lady is probably wedded, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the European Union vaccine programme, and she probably feels a sense of disappointment that actually this country decided to go out on its own and actually procure our vaccines. But the biggest difference is that actually in this country we've seen over 80 million vaccines already delivered into people's arms, giving them more protection, and so much more protection today, Madam Deputy Speaker, than we actually had back in March and April of this year, as this incredibly successful programme that has been led by the Prime Minister has had a real impact in terms of saving lives, keeping hospitalisation down, and ensuring that we can take these important steps back to normality, and both adults and, most importantly, children can get back on with their lives.
Robert Halford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome this government announcement today, and I thank my right honourable friend. We need to keep our children in school, not out of them. We know that in secondary schools, COVID-related absence was 10.4%, up from 6.2% on the 24th of June. And other analysis suggests that on an average year, 10 pupils due to sit GCSEs next summer have missed 1 in 4 days of face-to-face teaching this year. So what assessment has the government made of the impact on children not at school in exam years, and what remedial action are they going to take to ensure that there's a level playing field for these children who've missed so much school, they have a level playing field for next year's exams?
I know my right honourable friend raises a very important issue, and something that is, of course, concern to teachers, parents, but most of all pupils who will be looking towards 2022 and assessment and awarding of grades. It is our intention to move back to an exam system, but we do recognise that we need to ensure that there are mitigations that are put in place for pupils who will be taking that assessment in the next academic year. We will be looking at sharing more information as to what those mitigations are before the summer, and we'll obviously update his committee and the House accordingly.
We now go by video link to Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And many young people are extremely worried about next year's exams. And one young constituency recently told me, "I have never felt less confident in my ability to take part in next year's exams, if there even is that opportunity. And I'm sure many others are struggling. I ask for 2022 GCSE exams to be simpler, easier, and adapted to our lack of necessary education out of compassion." What does the Minister say to them, and when will schools get certainty about changes to next year's exams and assessments?
I think the Honourable Lady may not have heard the answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Harlow's question, but what we did say to my right honourable friend is that we'll be looking at giving further guidance and information to schools imminently, and we are very much looking at what are the measures to put mitigations there, but recognising the best form of assessment is always examination.
Sir Edward Lee.
Thank you for putting children first. In the last year, the education of children has been trashed. Now, whilst every death of a child is tragic, we have to understand there are 12.7 million children in this country, and sadly, every year 6,000 die. So can we have a sense of proportion? Will the Secretary of State reassure parents that the chances of any child falling seriously ill from COVID are, quote, vanishingly small, and there is no risk to children by what he's announced today?
My right honourable friend is right to point out how, as Professor Chris Whitty has pointed out so many times, that children have very little adverse effects of COVID on them if they're unfortunate enough to get it. And this is why we think that the steps that we have outlined today, combined with a vaccination programme that we are rolling out right across the country, means that it is right to take this next cautious but important step forward in light of the scientific, medical and health evidence.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today's announcement about the scrapping of bubbles and self-isolation for pupils will be welcome news to many parents, pupils and teachers across the country. But he made very passing reference to the importance of ventilation. And we know now how we know about the importance of ventilation because it's an airborne virus. Therefore, what more is he doing to support schools to put better ventilation in place? I visited Richmond upon Thames School in my constituency yesterday. They've spent £15,000 alone on improving ventilation. Many schools simply can't do that. They're struggling to balance the books already. So what more support will he put in place and follow the example of Germany and New York City?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, at every stage during this pandemic, we've provided support for schools as part of their measures that they've needed to put in place in order to be able to restrict the transmission of COVID and ensure that they're able to be open. We recognise that good hand sanitisation and good hygiene along with ventilation are important. We continue to offer advice to schools as to how best to deliver that.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Digital inclusion is a huge issue for pupils across Rother Valley. However, both the government and local businesses such as AES Seal have stepped in to eliminate this barrier. AES Seal has provided computers for over 1,500 households across Rotherham, and this government has provided 1.3 million laptops and tablets to disadvantaged students during the pandemic across the country. Can my right honourable friend confirm that pupils will continue to benefit from this record investment in IT equipment?
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend not only highlights the amazing work that we've seen in terms of distribution of laptops by the government right across the country, but the wonderful work of local businesses such as AES Seal, who have gone out of their way to support their communities, help children and make a real difference. And that really does show about how communities have come together to be able to support not just the elderly but also our children. It's a great testament, and I very much hope that the investment that AES Seal but also the government has made in terms of laptops and education technology will have a long and lasting legacy in terms of bettering people's education, not only in my honourable friend's constituency but in every one of our constituencies.
Christian Matheson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I press the Secretary of State on the question of exams that other honourable and right honourable members have mentioned? My constituent Ian is a teacher who points out that every time there have been changes to the exam system in the last couple of years to cope with the pandemic, it's been at last minute with very little time for schools and pupils to prepare. If the Secretary of State is considering changes to the exam system, can he have an open consultation with school leaders and teachers and get the plans in place as early as possible so that there isn't this sense of teachers being dumped upon at the last minute?
Well, I can absolutely assure the honourable gentleman that we talk to schools, teachers, school leaders, teachers and so many within the education sector continuously on these issues, and I can reassure him that, as has been mentioned to a couple of those who've raised questions, is that we're going to eminently be sharing further information in terms of assessment in the next academic year.
Damien Hines.
Speaker, can I strongly welcome my right honourable friend's statement and this return to normality, to stability with the contingencies and safeguards that he has set out. And I wonder would he agree with me that although sometimes people talk about a balance between education objectives and health objectives, actually overwhelmingly they go together, because being in school is so important for children's mental health, as we know, but also their physical health, and indeed for some children is a safety protective factor as well.
My right honourable friend is exactly right, and the benefits to mental health, the greatest single act that we can do in supporting children in their mental health was welcoming them back into schools on the 8th of March. That was the single act that anyone could have done to help every single child. And I notice that members opposite shake their head. I mean, they probably would like the situation where maybe schools remained empty and children just remained at home. And on this side, we recognise that the beneficial effects, not just in terms of the education, but also in terms of children's welfare, are delivered by children being in school.
We now go by video link to Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that the Secretary of State is familiar with Hull, and he knows about the educational challenges that we faced in the city before COVID. So I just want to press the Secretary of State on whether he really believes that less than 1 hour of tutoring a fortnight over the next school year is really enough to make up for the 115 days of in-school teaching children in Hull have missed this year.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, she's right to say this. I do know Hull very well, having my family coming from Hull, and and I do recognise that there's been a great amount of challenge that schools, not just within the great city of Kingston upon Hull, face, but right across the country. And that is why our support for schools is not just about tutoring, though, as the Honourable Lady will be aware, there's actually small group tutoring. There's so much evidence to point out that it delivers some of the best educational catch-up and the best results in terms of the money invested out of any intervention. But actually there's the recovery and COVID support in terms of premium that's gone to schools, so they're able to build on further actions and further interventions that they themselves can take to support children in order to be able to catch up on the work that they've missed.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also welcome and thank my right honourable friend for his statement today, and thank everyone who's worked so hard, the families and the staff, to ensure that education's been delivered to children over the course of the pandemic. But can I ask him to clarify a point around the self-isolation requirements? I think, as every parent knows, children, particularly very young children, have coughs and colds to a penny and temperatures. And at the moment, a temperature leads to a self-isolation, family self-isolation requirement, causing huge disruption for the child's education and development and impact on families. Can he unpack a bit what the requirements will be around children developing coughs and colds, particularly in early years, and what guidance and protocols will be taken forward, whether isolation will be necessary, whether testing will be necessary, or whether it can be moved over and put as just a simple cough or cold?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, what we'd always encourage people to do if they are poorly or ill in order to be able to remain at home, in order to be able to get better. For clarity, those who have been in contact with someone who has had COVID, they're still able to access education, be able to come in to school, but if they've had that contact, test and trace would then be in touch with that individual and advise them to take a PCR test. But that individual is able to continue to attend school during that time, unless, of course, they're demonstrating symptoms of COVID, where we would always advise people to self-isolate if that was the case, or, of course, they had had a positive PCR test. But other than those reasons, they were able to attend school.
Clive Effort.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State for Health has told us that there will be a spike in infections following the relaxing of restrictions. And there are 150,000 school pupils currently with suspected COVID that are out of school. So we know that that figure is going to go up. So this isn't about children dying of the infection. It's about schools being a vector for infection. And what is the Secretary of State going to do when the winter months are coming? We have increasing numbers of infections. to ensure that that doesn't happen by improving ventilation and assisting schools with the resources that they need in order to deliver a safer environment.
Well, I don't wish to sort of contradict the honourable gentleman, Madam Deputy Speaker, but, schools haven't been vectors of transmission. They have been reflective of the wider rates of COVID in the community, and they've been sort of reflective of that. And so we continue to, this is why we continue to have measures in place, including the testing that will be in place for schools as they return after the sort of summer period, and the continued twice-weekly testing that will run through September for children of secondary age to be taking those tests at home.
We now go by video link, or rather audio link, to Mark Harper. We don't.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. When schools return in
We will try to.
When schools return in September, every adult will have had the chance to be.
No, we will try to come back to the Right Honourable Member as soon as we can. Meanwhile, Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If you look at the data in York, infection rates are soaring, particularly in school-age children. People are poorly, and as a result of that, we're seeing major disruption in young people's education. So as we see infection rates soar across the country, it means education will be further disrupted, and I hope the Secretary of State recognises that. So how will he ensure there is effective testing put in place, working with our public health teams on the ground locally to mitigate against this spike in infections and ensure that young people are supported and families are supported as they're having to isolate and also miss school?
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is absolutely right that schools have and should continue to have a close and strong working relationships with local public health teams, not just in York, but right across the country. We have emphasised that as part of our guidance that we have issued and made available to schools, because we can recognise that we still have more to do, and the work in terms of defeating this virus will continue for past the summer and into the winter.
And now we go by video link to Nigel Mills.
Thank you. Can I welcome today's announcements? Could the Secretary of State confirm that the easing in restrictions won't affect his plans to provide high quality tutoring alongside normal education in schools?
I can absolutely reassure my honourable friend that that will be the case. I mean, their high-quality tutoring and the rollout of a national tutoring programme to have a positive impact on so many is one of the absolute top priorities of this government. It's the single thing that can probably have the biggest impact in terms of helping children to catch up on the lost learning. That's why we're making such a substantial investment into it.
And now we go by video link to Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What is the government doing to prevent the chaos of last year by ensuring that all higher education students can receive both vaccinations before moving around the country to their university? And how will the Secretary of State ensure that those turning 18 late in this academic year are offered both vaccinations before they move to university?
The Honourable Lady raises an important point, and this is why we're so pleased that we've been able to say to all those who are 18 and above that they have access to a vaccination, and we are working very closely with the university sector to really get through that message about how important it is that youngsters, students are out there getting their vaccine. It not only protects themselves, but it also protects their friends, their families and their community.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, having called for this in last week's debate, I warmly welcome the Education Secretary's statement today to prick the school bubbles and self-isolation system with effect from July the 19th. But could my right honourable friend just confirm the timing and whether it's entirely up to the schools themselves whether they implement any or all of these measures in the last week of term? What will happen during the summer schools, and how does the timing of this combine with his statement that children only need self-isolate if they test positive after August the 16th?
So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Member for Gloucester asks and then it's delivered for him. So it goes to show the power of the Honourable Member. We're leaving it to the discretion of schools for the final few days of terms. We're not expecting bubble systems to be operating during summer schools, including the holiday activity and food programme. This will be purely a test and trace approach, as they currently do with the whole adult population. And as we move to the 16th of August, this will be the moment that we're able to move to the system of not having to self-isolate for children, as they will able to just go for a PCR test and get that confirmation that they don't have COVID, or if they do have COVID, then sadly they will be in a position, and understandably, where they would have to isolate.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. School children have had a pretty miserable year, and COVID is a pretty miserable disease that tackles, that doesn't recognise the inequalities in society and disproportionately affects some of the poorest, most disadvantaged communities, the same communities that often need extra resource and help to get that educational attainment. So what more is the Secretary of State doing to tackle this inequality that was there before COVID but will still be there after it and exacerbated by it, to ensure that those children have the best start in life? They're our country's future. What more can we do to help them catch up and excel?
Well, the Honourable Member for Denton and Reddish and myself share that same passion to deliver that sort of change and deliver that sort of opportunity for so many children. It should never matter where you grew up. It should never matter as to what your personal circumstances. The ability for every child in this country to be able to access the world's best education, the very best opportunities, is something that I think drives us on all sides of this House. And there is, we've talked about the investment that we're making in terms of supporting children, to be helping them to be able to catch up. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that the drive in terms of raising standards in education, making sure that there is that knowledge-rich curriculum, that we're pushing every child, no matter their background, to their absolute maximum in order for them to be able to excel and have the opportunities that every single one of us would want for our own children, we want for the nation's children, and that is where the focus will be. And we are looking forward, as we cast our eyes further to the year ahead, as to spelling out a sort of a longer plan as to where we are going to deliver this in education, ensuring that we deliver for not only his constituents but all our constituents, regardless of their background.
Felicity Buck.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today. I understand that testing will continue in secondary schools until the end of September, and at that point it will be reviewed. Can my right honourable friend update the House as to what criteria we will be looking at the end of September? Because I don't think any of us want to see testing in schools in perpetuity.
None of us wish to see testing in perpetuity in schools. We are, though, as the Prime Minister has at every stage set out, taking a cautious, gradual approach to ensure that as we are able to lift restrictions, we're not in a position of having to reimpose them. So we feel that this is a prudent and sensible step that needs to be taken. If there are concerns and there is a continued need in order to be able to have testing in schools, then we would of course look at doing this, because the most important thing I think for all of us is to ensure that schools remain open and pupils are in those schools.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at the Bendrig Trust Outdoor Education Centre in my constituency. It was a massive joy to be able to see residentials beginning to slowly start again and young people getting the benefits from outdoor education. But it's a reminder of two things. Thing one, 6,000 to 15,000 people working in outdoor education at the beginning of the pandemic have now lost their jobs, and because of the lack of a specific bespoke package to support those centres, there are many that have closed and many more that are on the cusp of doing so. But the other thing that it reminds us of is that our outdoor education specialists in Cumbria and around the country have a unique set of skills that we need to deploy at this very moment to encourage young people to re-engage with learning and reignite a love of learning. What will he do to specifically commission outdoor education centres to do that out in mainstream schools? And will he meet with me and some outdoor education specialists to make sure we can explain how it could be done?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's like as if his constituency neighbour, the honourable member for Barrow, and him sort of think incredibly alike. I'm sure not on absolutely everything, but certainly on this issue. And the honourable member for Barrow and Furness was meeting with myself just last week, and we're talking about this exact issue. Of course, the best thing that we can do in terms of helping those outdoor centres is making sure that their doors could open, not just to be able to welcome day visitors, but those who want to stay there on a residential basis. And we'll continue to look at what other measures we can do to support this sector. I know that the value and enrichment that comes as a result of doing so many activities, whether it's beyond Lake Windermere or so many other excellent locations around the country, bring real benefit. And I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Minister for School Standards, would be happy to meet with him and some colleagues.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I strongly welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the 4 schools in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk, that received condition improvement funding, such as Golden Hill Primary Academy. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, rather than flogging the dead horse of exams, which I was going to do, I'm going to jump to a different one instead, which is let's lock off 10% of pupil premium funding. Let's make sure that funding goes into high-quality extracurricular enrichment activities, as laid out by myself previously in the House and with the Challenger Trust, who do excellent work up in Gateshead. And let's ensure that we can give those disadvantaged pupils the access to high-quality enrichment activities that many enjoy, such as the type of schools that I attended, which were private schools such as Prince Thorpe College.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable member for Stoke-on-Trent North and Torque and Kidsgrove is a man that does like to chew a Secretary of State's ear off, especially when it comes to condition improvement funding for his schools. And it was great to see that 4 schools benefiting from his assiduous lobbying on this matter and making sure that he's delivering for his constituency. The honourable gentleman raises an important point about the use of pupil premium funding, and we do want to see schools looking at how this is more effectively targeted, especially at those pupils who are from the most disadvantaged background, especially at those pupils who need that extra support. And in the past, far too often, it's been just seen as another stream of funding going into schools, and I think we do need to get schools to be looking at how this is delivering for those pupils that it was targeted at.
And we now go by video link to Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Secretary of State explain how children will access free school meals if they have to isolate away from holiday activities and food programmes during this summer? And does he agree with me that a cash transfer system enabling parents to get the fund and supplies that are right for the children would actually ensure better support reaches all those that need it?
The honourable gentleman raises a valuable point, and this is why the support provided by the Department for Work and Pensions through local authorities being able to provide free school extra assistance in order to be able to ensure children are fed through the summer is such an important part of our programme, sitting alongside our holiday activity and food programme, which of course is going to be delivering not just food for so many students, but also activities, which is just as valuable.
In the hope that communications have improved in the Forest of Dean, yes, we'll try to go back to Mark Harper.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. When schools return into September, every adult will have had the chance to be vaccinated once at least, which provides the bulk of protection. So why is regular testing still going to continue, perhaps forever? Last week, the Secretary of State said he wanted to see it end. What's changed?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, not only do we get his voice, we get his picture as well, so enhanced in every single and possible way. Of course, we want to see schools returning to as much as normal as quickly as possible, but we have always taken the view that we need to take a cautious and careful approach, because we always want to see things being in a place where we're not having to take steps backwards. We had one of the most successful testing programmes that have ever been run in this country that was delivered in schools on the week commencing for March the 8th, and we have seen this play an important role in terms of containing COVID and dealing with COVID, but most importantly ensuring that we can keep schools open and welcoming to pupils.
Tom Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst all these huge issues are going on, the largest teaching union in the country, the National Education Union, has said there is an urgent need to decolonise the curriculum, and how classroom layouts are in fact represent colonialism. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that actually probably more of an urgent need is for the largest teaching union in the country to finally focus on this urgent need to get kids catching up their learning, and to work, perhaps for the first time, constructively with government to try and ease these remaining restrictions?
Balsden resign.
My honourable member is a new member and arrives here with a lot of optimism, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to reassure my honourable friend that we have a broad and balanced and knowledge-rich curriculum that we should be very proud of, though we always work to make sure it's even better. But it is with some sadness, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's the National Education Union, first of all, started off by saying that they didn't want teachers to teach pupils in person. Then they said they didn't actually want teachers to teach students online. It starts to make you question as to whether the National Education Union really actually believes in education at all. But we will wait and see, and hopefully they'll be more cooperative and hard-working in the next academic year.
So now we go by video link to Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Regular testing for pupils and staff is going to be a vital part of stopping the spread of COVID-19. But the decline in testing numbers shows that home testing currently isn't working well. Tackling this with on-site testing would mean some schools in my constituency having to test 600 children a day, which they tell me they simply don't have the resources to do. Will the Secretary of State give schools the resources they need, including external support if they need it, to make sure they're able to carry out testing and keep children safe?
I would like to reassure the Honourable Lady that we will be supporting schools as they roll out the testing. Schools have delivered the asymptomatic testing on school premises incredibly successfully already in this academic year, and we'll look at providing the same level of support to schools as we did earlier on in March, and we have every confidence that we're able to deliver that right across the country.
James Wilde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome these changes that will mean that healthy pupils can spend more time in the classroom. And following my recent visit to Ashwickham Primary School, can I urge my right honourable friend to ensure, as part of the recovery plan and with an eye to the spending review, that schools get the special educational needs funding that is required now more than ever, so that every child's needs are met.
Well, I know that my right honourable friend is a great champion for not only his schools and his constituency, but also children with special educational needs, where we all have a very shared passion to do more for. He's tempting me into sort of public discussions with Her Majesty's Treasury, maybe a sort of over the dispatch box straight to the Chancellor. While I'm tempted and he's desperately trying to lure me down that path, I'm going to decline on this occasion to sort of enter that public discourse. But of course, children with special educational needs are a top priority for us. I would certainly be expecting that is properly reflected in any future settlements.
Chiomura.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the end of mandatory bubble isolation, which has caused such disruption to parents, teachers and children. But the impact of COVID continues and the poorest are hardest hit. Over the last 5 years, child poverty in Newcastle Central has risen by 13 percentage points to 45%, 6 times the national average increase. So what additional support can children in Newcastle Central expect, apart from the catch-up plan, which the government's own Educational Recovery Commissioner described as feeble?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the things that we can do to best help all children across the country is the continued drive to raise standards across our schools. Of course, she sort of dismisses over £3 billion investment that we've made. But this is an important investment targeted at the interventions that will deliver the biggest benefit to her constituents.
Steve Bryan.
Thanks. Last Monday I made clear my view and those of many in my constituency, the unfairness of the bubble system and the consequential isolation, so I welcome today's confirmation. But isn't it the case that sending the whole bubble home because of one positive case is no more necessary now than outdoor sports days being cancelled or held behind closed doors, or end-of-term events being ruined, things that we never get back? How can the Secretary of State and his team help colleagues across all educational settings feel supported to get the balance right come the new term?
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend picks upon the issue of sports days, and let's be absolutely clear, the guidance is absolutely there in black and white, saying sports days can proceed. Parents should be able to attend, and we really encourage schools to be able to do that, because he rightly points out these are things that you can't get back. So this is why we wanted to be able to lift those restrictions at the very earliest possible moment. If members, and I know my honourable friend is familiar with his regional schools commissioner, if there are challenges, having that local dialogue with regional school commissioner teams are an important part if they are having challenges in terms of dealing with their school directly.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Early years and nurseries, like the fantastic Grasmere Nursery in Luton North that I had the pleasure of visiting recently, are a vital part of our education system. While primary and secondary schools have had some of their COVID costs compensated, nurseries have not had a single penny of costs incurred during the pandemic reimbursed. Why are nurseries always an afterthought for this government? And will this unfairness be rectified? And if not, why not?
I'm sure the Grasmere Nursery is reflective of many nurseries right around the country that actually had the sort of benefit of being funded at pre-COVID levels, and we carried on that level of funding, recognising the fact that they were operating in truly exceptional times.
So no then.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the step back to normality and letting children be children that the scrapping of the bubble system brings, but there continues to be an anxiety that affects people on both sides of this particular debate, and that is whether the vaccination programme will be extended into those under 18 years of age. So can I ask my right honourable friend to redouble his efforts to work with colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care so that we can push the JCVI to come forward with their recommendations, so one way or the other a decision can be made that takes away that additional anxiety from young people?
My honourable friend is right to highlight the important nature to ensure that we have the correct and best information to inform decisions on the matter of vaccination of children. It is my hope that JCVI will be forthcoming imminently with their report, and that will obviously that will obviously inform decisions that government makes very much in the best interest of all our children.
And finally, Liz Twist.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For many months now, school leaders have been spending a lot of their time on weekends making contacts where they're notified of someone having COVID-19. So I'm glad to say that some of that responsibility will be shifted to NHS Test and Trace. But can the Secretary of State just clarify exactly what that relationship will be, given the references to settings still having a role to play in that situation?
Secretary of State.
Of course, and the Honourable lady is right to highlight the amazing and important role that schools, head teachers, the whole education team have played in terms of supporting the efforts on test and trace. We expect the contacting to shift from schools having to do it to shifting to test and trace to do it. But of course there will still be contact and information that will sometimes be asked of schools. But we don't imagine that the current burdens that schools have to face will be, we see this being scaled back considerably, very much to head teachers and teachers' benefit.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Point of order. Mark Tammy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Friday, the Secretary of State for International Trade visited Airbus at Broughton in my seat. Her office gave me 14 minutes notice before the meeting was due to take place. 14 minutes, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just wonder what she can advise we can do to ensure that the rules that apply to the rest of us also apply to government ministers.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for having given me notice that he intended to raise this point of order, and I can say very simply and in a straightforward way that such behaviour by a minister, or indeed any member, is wrong. Just quite simply wrong. Members may not be aware because things have not been operating normally here this last year and a bit. There is a little booklet called Rules of Behaviour and Courtesies in the House of Commons. I seriously advise everybody to look at this little booklet. It's not some ancient tome hidden away in the library about the way in which things work here in this ancient parliament. It's bang up to date. And it says quite clearly, on a matter of courtesy between one member and another, that you should notify colleagues whenever you intend to visit a colleague's constituency, except, of course, on purely private visits. And I take it that the Honourable Gentleman is certain that this was not a private visit. I take it that the Honourable Gentleman has informed the Right Honourable Lady to whom he refers.
I have.
Excellent, that he intended to raise this point of order, then she will be aware of the situation. And I can simply say to all members that it says in this booklet, and Mr. Speaker takes this very seriously, failing to inform colleagues of your intention to visit their constituency is regarded as very discourteous. And that's what I can say to the Honourable Gentleman now. It is discourteous for a minister to behave in this fashion. I'm quite sure that an apology will be forthcoming. Point of order, Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the government rejected the cross-party proposals from the Business Select Committee into the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. Can I ask through you, Madam Deputy Speaker, whether the government will come to this chamber and give a statement and explain their disgraceful decision to continue to take billions of pounds from the pockets of retired miners?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order and for having told me she intended to raise this point of order. I'm not at all surprised, as I've heard her speak many, many times about this subject with passion here in this chamber. The Honourable Lady will know, of course, that the decision of ministers to whether or not to come to the House to make an announcement or to respond to a report is not a matter for the chair, but I can advise the Honourable Lady that there are various ways in which the Table Office will be able to advise her that she might endeavour to bring a minister here to the chamber to answer the questions which clearly to her and to her constituents are important questions. Thank you. I will now suspend the House for 3 minutes in order that arrangements can be made for the next item of business. Order!